Now, you have got purposely designed evacuation lifts and firefighting lifts. These are features which allow their use in the evacuation of people with disabilities. Other lifts, like I say, are not because they could be taken out. During a fire evacuation, once the fire and rescue service is in attendance, it may operate a lift override system to use the lift to access the fire. As a result, all lifts in the building for fire service access use may be gone back to the fire service access level and the car park. Once this happens, it's not possible to call lifts as they will be under the control of the fire brigade. So when they arrive, it goes straight down. When they arrive, the fire brigade can operate it. Therefore, firefighting lifts may only be used in the early stages of the evacuation progress in agreement with the fire and rescue service. So you've got to discuss with the fire brigade if you're going to use the firefighting lifts or the evacuation lifts. Where they are used, disabled people should make their way to the lift point and use the communication system which will be there to contact the person coordinating the use of the lifts, but possibly security, before they use them. Don't just get in the lift. And there may also be communication points where the coordinator can be contacted by any disabled person in a temporary waiting space. So all your refugees should have some form of communication like this here that you can push to communicate that you are in that refuge. In some buildings, horizontal evacuation to adjacent compartments can be used prior to the use of an ordinary lift. So in other words, getting across, but you've got to be careful using any lift at all, because ordinary lifts generally you can't use because of the power supply if they do fail down. What about doors? Now, some people have difficulty opening self-closing fire doors. These doors and their self-closing devices are generally held open by links linked to the fire brigade. But when the alarm goes off, they all shut. And they should comply with the British standard. But they take some force, these. Now, these doors are designed to hold back smoke and fire to protect the occupants and facilitate their evacuation. Now, doors which are fitted with automatic opening for accessibility may have this disengaged automatically in a fire by a link to the fire brigade. So in other words, the ones that already say it will open, it won't open in a fire because it's critical that that does actually remain closed during a fire. Now, this needs to be considered when you're looking at disabled people, and they should be informed that these normal doors that you can push access to will not work. In other words, you've got to consider now, are they in a safe place? This needs to be considered, and disabled people informed that these doors, which they may normally be able to negotiate without difficulty, may pose a difficulty in the event of a fire. When the alarm goes off, they've got to be informed that they won't be able to use those doors. What about open risers then? Open risers on stairs. Now, these may not pose difficulty where the stair is being used for descent only, but when ascending the stair, open risers on the stairs can cause difficulty because some people, at the risk of trapping the toes on their shoes as they're going up, is a trip hazard. So be careful with open risers. Tactile flooring to indicate the top of the stairs to someone who's blind should be considered. You know the tactile flooring? So they can feel, yes, this is the top stair. And again, you've got to be careful with that. Because there was a case where they put tactile flooring on the top so blind people knew the top. The problem was the people in the office, the young ladies in there, high heel shoes, one of them nearly fell down the stairs because of the tactile flooring. So in other words, don't create one problem by solving one. By solving one, don't create another problem. What about the stair enclosure then? Now, the fire-resisting construction of escape stairs does offer protection using these stairs, and anyone in there, they are actually deemed to be a place of relative safety. If it's a protected staircase, the travel distance stops when they reach the stairway because it's deemed to be safe. In other words, now they're in there, they're safe, they shouldn't be able to get out. And this reinforces the importance of building occupiers keeping self-closing fire doors in the closed position. Because once they get in there, they're deemed to be safe. If the self-closer don't shut or there's no seal on there, you've just lost you've lost your staircase. So make sure you protect your staircases with your fire doors for means of escape. What about temporary waiting areas, refuges? Refuges are temporary areas. Disabled people should not always be required to wait for the main floor to be completed. Where a person may need to rest or they feel uncomfortable with people behind them, it may be appropriate to design a plan that allows resting in temporary waiting areas provided along the route. So these are temporary waiting areas of refuges. However, if they are likely to cause obstruction to other people leaving the building, it may be safer if they do follow the main floor. Some evacuation chairs do go quite quick. So rather than just stop somebody there, let the good person go down as long as they're using a proper evacuation chair, because they do actually have quite a quick flow, these evacuation chairs. A temporary waiting space, like I said, refuge, is an area that's separated from fire by fire-resisting compartmentation. And it's also provided with a safe route to a storey exit. In other words, once they're there, they should then be able to escape to a place of relative or ultimate safety. And it's just a safe area. Now, make sure your refuges are refuges. People put refuges. I went to one company, I said, where's your refuge on this floor? They said, it's in the kitchen. I said, in the kitchen? Why is that? I mean, that's a refuge. They said, well, it's the only one that's got a proper fire door. I said, that fire door's to stop the fire getting out, not in. Yeah, that's not a refuge. She thought it was only one with the fire door. No, your stairwells are usually a refuge. Make sure it's an acceptable refuge. Now, people should not be left in a temporary waiting area to wait for the fire brigade. So don't forget, you don't say, use the refuge, wait there for the fire brigade. These temporary waiting spaces are a safe resting place as a place to wait until you find out if a full evacuation is established, if it's needed. So these are areas where the manager then could find out where the fire is, if there's a real fire, find out where it is. If the person's at risk, they should be able to get out. That is a temporary safety place. Now, many temporary waiting spaces on these stairs can only accommodate one wheelchair. That's all that can fit on there. Now, this shouldn't be a problem as long as you've got a strategy to get the people out. But if you haven't got a strategy to get people out, do you understand? You've got to be careful now whether you restrict the use of that area to a number of people. Yeah, if you can't put the person somewhere safe, you can't allow them to go in there. Do you understand? You've got to make sure that your refuge can hold the number of people you are allowing, unless your strategy can get the people moving. Now, how many refuges do you need? Well, a refuge should be provided for each protected stairway, affording egress from each storey. So, in a protected stairway, there should be a refuge at each point, except storeys consisting exclusively of plant rooms. So, if it's just got a plant room in there, you don't have to have a refuge in there. Now, don't forget, whilst a refuge should be provided for each stairway, they need not necessarily be located within the stair enclosure, but should give direct access to the stair. So you might have a lobby approach or something, an outside lobby that can link to that area. Now, the number of refuge spaces need not necessarily equal the sum of the number of wheelchair users who can be present. Now, this is, be careful with this statement though, because they form part of the management plan, and it may be more that more than one disabled person can use a single refuge as they pass through it. In other words, as long as you can demonstrate your evacuation plan, they're not just basically left in there. There's people moving out, there's people with evacuation chairs or what have you. You can have more, but you've got to be careful. You can't allow more people in a building with a refuge than the refuge will hold, unless your management plan can show that they are moving, they are getting people out. Now, how big should a refuge be? Well, each refuge should provide an area accessible to a wheelchair, basically at least 900mm by 1400mm. Now, where a refuge is a protected stairway or protected corridor, the wheelchair space should not reduce the width of the escape route. In other words, it should not impede the flow of people going down the stairs. Now, where the wheelchair space is within a protected stairway, access to the wheelchair space should not obstruct the flow of persons. That's the key. If it's on a stairway or anything like that, you've got to maintain the flow of people going down. It should not impede them, because obviously that person then becomes an obstruction. Now, what are acceptable as refuges? Well, a storey could be divided into two refuges by compartment walls. So if it's got full compartment wall, one refuge is another one. As you can see here, this part here is a refuge compared to that part. Another refuge is shown here in a protected lobby, protected corridor or protected stairway. Did you see that person, that wheelchair, that refuge there is not impeding the flow of people. It's not reduced the flow, Another acceptable refuge can be in the open air, such as a flat roof, balcony, podium or similar place which is sufficiently protected or remote from any fire risk, and it's got to be provided with its own means of escape. So once they're there, there is still an adequate means of escape to get outside, and it must be suitably protected. What about on ground floor? Do you need a refuge? I went to a client walking around a public building, walking around ground floor with full inclusive design, ramp access all the way around. The manager showed me, he says, there's our refuge. He pointed to a room, a refuge, on the ground floor. I said, why have you got a refuge in there for? He said, well, you've got to have a refuge, haven't you? I said, no, you've got full inclusive design. You've got ramp access. Why can't you just get the person out? He said, no, I've got a refuge. Can you imagine that in a fire? You've got a person in a wheelchair. Where are you going? I'm not going out. You're not going out. No, I've got a refuge for you. In you go. Get them out. On the ground floor, you don't need a refuge if you can evacuate. You need a refuge in areas where you can't evacuate. Well, what is an unacceptable refuge then? Well, unacceptable refuge should not be positioned where they would adversely affect the means of escape, in storage used for plant only, their areas. So in other words, any area that's not protected, you can't use it as a refuge. It's got to be protected, that's the key thing. Where do you not need a refuge? Well, you don't need refuges in a building with stories less than 280 square metres floor area, ground and first floors in one occupancy. Now, do basements need refuges? Well, yes, an appropriate evacuation aid must be provided to assist people in lower basement levels. In other words, getting the person out of the basement. And it's harder to evacuate up than down. That's why standards now generally you need a 1,000 mil staircase down for evacuation of disabled, but coming up it's 1,200 mil because it accepts it's harder to evacuate someone upstairs than downstairs, so the staircases must be wider. What happens if you have a group of visitors with the disabilities? Well, part of the booking procedure for groups should include provision of standard plans. Now, where there is a large number of disabled people, the group organiser may play a vital role in the provision of these plans. An appropriate contact point for each group of people visiting the building should be established depending on the nature of the organisation. And this may be a reception point or via the meeting booking procedure or via the person or department that they are visiting. Where there are security and porter services, these can provide a support role and allocate standard plans for visitors. And it also provides assistance in other ways. Now, function and conference organisers will be responsible for ensuring that disabled people attending conferences or meetings within that building are provided with a suitable plan. And it's important that the booking forms invite delegates to identify the needs. So there should be something on that delegate there. Will you require assistance in a case of emergency? You've got to put on the question. You've got to ask the question to allow them to put that in. Now, when a room is booked, a standard procedure should be there to check if there are disabled people attending, and if so, is there a suitable plan in place? What about public access buildings then? Now, in some public access buildings, such as museums, art galleries, shopping centres, there will be little or no control over the people who are visiting coming in there. So you don't know who's going to turn up to your library or whatever, and little in chance of knowing what their impairments are. So don't forget, the staff need to understand the different evacuation options available to communicate these effectively to disabled people during an emergency and provide further assistance if required. What about sleeping accommodation? Well, where sleeping accommodation is provided, such as in a hotel, the check-in procedure should include the offer of a suitable evacuation plan, whether the room is specially adapted or not. Additional information for disabled people may be required in each room adjacent to the evacuation procedures for all residents. So you understand, back at the door it tells you the evacuation procedures for non-disabled. You should consider putting the evacuation procedure there for disabled people as well. Now, some disabled people use hotels or other residential accommodation may not need an adapted room but may need some support to evacuate. Therefore, a sign should be displayed at reception alongside the normal evacuation saying, if you require assistance, please ask. For blind persons and those with a visual impairment, the receptionist could explain the instructions after the person has checked in and provide them with a copy of the instructions, possibly in braille or in tape, as a reasonable adjustment. So you could consider, for a blind person, put the instructions in braille. Evacuation instructions displayed in each room should be made available in other accessible formats. Now, where disabled persons require a high level of physical assistance, for example in meeting or hotel rooms, with easier egress rooms should be priority booked. If you know somebody is going to have real problems getting out, consider getting someone where there's easier access and easier egress.